My partner Roberto Hernandez and I, Elisa Vasali, are conducting an interview from two psychology professors at St. Edward's University. They are Dr. Delia Pascos and Dr. Thomas Ufig. The main point for this interview is to discover the importance of writing in the field of psychology through the opinion of these experienced professors. So, what sort of texts do students in psychology typically read?
Depends what level of class, so there's introductory psychology textbook and then there's the advanced textbooks.
What sort of texts do you regularly read?
I read a lot of journals.
Related to psychology?
Yeah, so I read a lot of journals, and so there are journals in my field which are sort of people would read just so they know what's going on in the world and research and psychology, and there are a whole bunch of them, like Journal of Anxiety Disorders, Journal of Abnormal Psychology, or just some names of literature that I read. Yeah.
How can these different texts be applied out of class, in the real world?
So in psychology, you learn a lot about how people function and group dynamics and different disorders. So you always encounter these in real life, in the real world. So a lot of students can read about them and then learn how to identify them and sometimes how to manage some of the things they see in real life. So it's very applicable to real world situations.
Does it depend on the field of psychology?
Right, there are a lot of different fields, but particularly clinical psychology, you're dealing with a lot of the things I'm talking about.
How critical is reading and writing for psychology?
It's really important. It's probably one of the most important things. If you don't have good reading, writing skills, you're gonna it's going to be very difficult because you have to be able to read a lot of information and learn how to analyze it. So very important.
Are there some key features to write psychology textbooks or psychology journals?
Just a good sense of organization and expertise in the topic. Those are probably the major ones that are important.
What would be your best advice for writing in psychology?
Just to know how to analyze text critically, be able to understand how to write scientifically, and how science works in general. Those are all very valuable skills for understanding the discipline of psychology, broadly speaking. All right, so one of the assignments you have to do in the class is you have to pick a certain disorder, and this is for my abnormal psychology class. You pick a psychological disorder, and the student has to research. They have to read a lot of journals and a lot of literature. You have to kind of figure out, what does the literature say about a particular topic. Then they have to integrate all the literature together, and then when they write it, they have to think about what's the most important thing about this disorder, that I researched, and how best do I sort of go about describing it. And then they also have to talk about how to treat the disorder. So they really have to examine all of the reading in the field particular to a disorder, like say depression. I'm going to read everything I can find about depression, all the research studies about depression, how to go about treating it, be able to write very nicely about summarizing all that literature. So really the most important thing in psychology is being able to read a lot of stuff out there and being able to summarize it in short paragraphs, which is very difficult to do because there's a lot of research about these different disorders. So the question is, how do you bring it all together, in a nice way that would make sense to somebody reading the paper? So that's a lot of where the critical skills come in, and sort of the higher thinking in psychology, and being able to kind of read like a scientist, being able to understand sort of the research that you're reading about.
So I think analyzing is very important.
I'm sorry?
Like analyzing the text.
Exactly, analyzing the text, and it's actually, you have to really practice at it, because some of the text is very complicated and uses a lot of statistics, things like that, so you have to learn and have the background to be able to kind of understand what it's really telling you, So that's really, in psychology particularly, where kind of reading and writing is really important for those types of questions.
Thank you. What sorts of texts do students in psychology typically read?
I would say that the majority of it is journals and journal articles. And this kind of gets at what we also expect students, and what I do as well in terms of writing, is that most of it is research-based. So you have to read journal articles to see what's been done before, to kind of compile this review of the literature, to kind of set the stage of, this is what's been done, now I want to do this, I want to go out and conduct this experiment to kind of fill this gap or address these issues that are not currently being addressed in the literature. So it's usually research papers, although there's other things that are important, like to clinicians, but usually it's still kind of research on clients, and yeah.
So like this is a very broad question, but how can like these texts be applied out of class, like in the real world?
Well, so I mean, we have in the classroom, we have students practice writing like a literature review, or actually doing an experiment and writing the background, and then writing like what kind of methods did they use, what were the results that they found, what do these findings mean. But all of that is really practice for doing that exact same thing when you're out. It's just that instead of doing it as a class activity and conducting this experiment to kind of illustrate how to do an experiment, you're actually conducting real research. And so those skills, or that skill set that you learn, is exactly the same stuff that you're going to be using when you get out. So, I mean, I still write literature reviews, not only when I'm doing research, but also when I'm applying for grants to get money to do research. You have to review the literature out there and kind of set the stage and say, this is why I want to do this, please give me money, kind of thing. So I mean, it works both ways, before you do the research and then also in the process of doing the research.
From 1 to 10, how critical do you think writing and reading is for psychology?
I would say a 9. Yeah, and I think that's two of the best skills that you're going to get, in, not just in psychology, but as a liberal arts education, that you will leave this university knowing how to read really well and how to write really well. And regardless if you apply that to the field of psychology or in any discipline that you go into, it's good skills to have. So, very important.
What would be your best advice for writing?
Practice, because writing in psychology is very different than other writing, especially like writing that you do in an English class. So it's scientific writing. So in terms of, I mean, like in an English class, you want to capture the reader and get them to want to keep reading your paper and make it very, like where they can just imagine it and they're just don't want to, like think about a great book that you don't want to put down, right? So that's a great skill to have, and if you can write that way scientifically, kudos to you. It's difficult to do, but scientific writing tends to be very choppy, very to the point. So it's kind of dry writing, and it's very different to write that way than to write like in an English class. And I think that it just takes practice. It's such a different style of writing that most people don't come into a psychology class knowing how to do that. They really need some practice doing it. And yeah, I mean, I'm still practicing, it takes years and years and years to kind of get used to that style.